I was banned from my family's yacht trip without a word, without warning, just quietly erased. My name vanished from the guest list as if it had never existed, replaced seamlessly by someone else, someone orchestrated by Valora. At first, I tried to convince myself it was a mistake. I'd sat at their tables countless times, thinking I belonged, only to find the reality was different. Each time, a subtle look, a gentle exclusion, a muted laugh reminded me that my presence was optional. And then the staff called me owner. Just that. One sentence, clear and undeniable. And I laughed because it was true. It had always been true. But why did that simple acknowledgement shake them more than all the lies they'd told about me? I start my mornings slow. The sun filters softly through the kitchen window, lighting the speckles on the granite countertop. My favorite ceramic mug, the one with the small crack I never replaced, warms my hands. Lyle had already left for a client meeting, leaving a faint trail of aftershave and the half-eaten remains of a banana behind him. My phone buzzed almost idly in my hand. I scrolled, absent-mindedly, through emails, calendars, and notifications, until a boomerang popped up from my niece. Champagne glasses clinking. The yacht's gleaming rails. The caption, "Family getaway tradition loading. Can't wait to set sail." My thumb froze. The annual Preston family yacht trip. A tradition I had been invited to exactly twice in my life. The first time I suggested rotating destinations and learned painfully that my ideas were not part of the plan. The second time, Valora made it unmistakably clear. I was a guest, not family. I tapped into the post. Faces I knew. Flora's tight-lipped smile. Her husband Tom, the twins, fully with her mimosa. Lyle's younger cousin and his fiancée. Everyone but me. The group chat, Preston Legacy Voyagers, had silently excluded me. Lyle had added me years ago, then quietly removed me after a dinner seating mishap. I checked anyway. No messages, no emails, just empty silence. My pulse didn't spike, it stilled. This wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate. That afternoon, as I rinsed a glass in the sink, my phone buzzed. A message not meant for me, a screenshot of the cabin assignments. My name crossed out. Belle, Valora's yoga instructor. The same woman who once asked if I was Lyle's assistant. A voice note followed. Valora's laugh. "Well, at least the energy on board won't be so tight this year." I set the phone down, hand steady, jaw aching from clenching. Dinner arrived. Lyle distracted by stock alerts. I asked lightly, almost casual, "Did you know your family's planning another yacht trip?" He glanced up. "Yeah, Mom mentioned it last week. I think they're finalizing the list." I tilted my head. "Am I on the list?" His fork paused midair. "Of course, why wouldn't you be?" I smiled just enough to hold the tension. He returned to his phone. "I'll double-check," he said. But he never did. I washed dishes by hand, each plate a meditation, each glass a rehearsal of quiet resilience. Silence, I realized, often carries more weight than shouting. That night, I lay staring at the ceiling fan slicing the air above me, replaying every exclusion. Birthdays without invites, brunches discovered through Instagram stories, conversations that stalled when I entered the room. I wasn't naive. I never expected warmth from Valora, but the deliberate orchestration stung in a way cold water never could. No one would admit it aloud. No one needed to. By the bedside lamp, I opened my journal and wrote one sentence. Watch. Don't react yet. Steady ink. Intentional pause. The next morning, a text from Valora arrived, thinly veiled as an apology. "Hey Marjorie, just realizing we may have missed reserving a spot for you on the yacht. Totally my oversight. The trip filled up quicker than expected this year. So sorry. Hope we can catch up after." Sweet poison coated in emojis, casual dismissal of deliberate action. I did not respond. I could not trust my fingers to preserve my composure. I reread it, closed the phone, got dressed. My plan for the farmer's market evaporated. Jeans, sweater, cold coffee. Mid-morning, the charter company's email arrived. Cancellation confirmed. Processed 3 days prior. Requester, Valora Preston. So, that was her game. I stared at the screen until the edges blurred. Not from tears, but from a pressure behind my eyes I couldn't name. Forwarded to myself. Printed. One crisp copy. Slipped into the manila folder labeled Tax Plus Property. It would gain a new label soon. When Lyle returned, late afternoon sunlight streaked the living room floor. Shoes kicked off, keys in the ceramic dish. I waited. He grabbed a beer. Valora texted me. I began. He frowned, unsteady. Oh? The yacht trip? I recounted the email and the cancellation. He swirled the beer, searching for an answer. Maybe a miscommunication, he offered. I shook my head, calm. She replaced my name. That's not miscommunication. That's a receipt. He stayed quiet, and in that quiet, I heard everything I needed. Later, at the dining table, I opened a fresh note. Things she's done that I let slide. A list poured forth, missed invites, accidental tagging, overlooked emails, orchestrated brunches. Each line a stitch in a tapestry of erasure. I felt clarity pulse through me, a steel thread from collarbone to fingertips. And then, from the unknown assistant, another message. A thread not meant for me. Valora, don't worry. She's not coming. I handled it. 4 words that made the room darker. The clock passed 10. Lyle, still in the den, pretending none of this existed. I added the printouts to the folder, gently closed it. This was never about a cabin. It was about standing, visible and undeniable, in a world that had tried to make me invisible. The yacht wasn't just a boat. It was the first thing I had bought on my own. 5 years of late nights, skipped vacations, investor rejections, deliveries, and secondhand blazers. Each rejection, each moment of perseverance, culminated in this: ownership. Lyle's name on the papers was legal, not a concession of power. Yet within months, the family had recast it as theirs, woven into Valora's curated narrative of legacy. Recipes, charity events, design ideas, everything I planted, she claimed. I gathered the evidence: ownership papers, bank wires, the original yacht catalog with my notes, laid them out like evidence in a trial I hadn't asked to start. Low, simmering resolve replaced anger, pulsing like steel through my chest. I whispered, "You tried to disappear me. Now, watch." They streamed the family dinner live. Laughter, clinking glasses, the long table dressed in gold-rimmed plates and eucalyptus runners. Valora Center stage, curated and polished. A crew member, oblivious to the broadcast, or perhaps very aware, announced clearly, "Glad to have you aboard again, Ms. Marjorie, the owner." Valora froze. Mid-laugh, mid-movement, eyes wide, hand paused in air. 3 seconds of suspended disbelief. Then, forced composure. Callista beside me whispered, "That's going viral." Comments flooded in. Her performance had backfired on the audience. She found me 10 minutes later near the port hallway. "You planned that." Her hiss barely audible. I met her gaze, calm. "Planned what? A man doing his job?" I didn't need to say more. "I bought my place," I added softly. Blink. And then she walked away. Alone in the cabin later, I traced the edges of the folder. Transcripts, contracts, receipts. Evidence stacked not as a weapon, but as affirmation. The evening proceeded. Valora delivered a closing toast. The table murmured in habitual reverence. I stood quietly, laid the folder flat, fingers pointing to the transcript, Legal notes, ownership confirmations. The room stilled, eyes widened. Murmurs began. Lyle remained still. Valora's color drained. A cousin coughed. Harold murmured acknowledgement. The house shifted without fanfare. I gathered my documents, returned them to the folder. "If you want the truth," I said softly, "ask the one who has the receipts." Silence followed. Ocean brushed the hull. Teak deck cooled underfoot. Salt air stung. The tension lingered, dissipating slowly. The next morning, subtle acknowledgments arrived. Ronald confirmed ownership, apologized. Callista published the essay. Maya, young and perceptive, sought guidance. I hosted a brunch with trusted guests, light streaming through the window, laughter unforced. The table was mine. I built it. Legacy is earned, not handed down. And in claiming it, I finally understood that standing still, in the space you deserve, can be the most radical act of all. I stared at the screen, the edges of my vision blurring slightly, not from tears, but from the sudden mounting pressure behind my eyes. I forwarded the email to myself, then printed it. One copy, crisp, clean. I slid it into a manila folder I kept in my bottom drawer labeled Tax Plus Property. It would get a new label soon. By the time Lyle returned, the sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the living room floor. He kicked off his shoes, dropped his keys into the ceramic dish by the door. Like any Thursday, except nothing about this was ordinary. I waited quietly until he grabbed a beer from the fridge, the condensation sliding down the glass like droplets of time, slow and unyielding. Valora texted me. She says she forgot to reserve me a spot. I said calmly. He paused, frowning, caught off guard but not shocked. "Really? That seems odd," he said. "Maybe just a miscommunication. You know how chaotic those things get, coordinating everyone." I shook my head. Calm, deliberate. "It's not a miscommunication. I got the cancellation email, submitted 3 days ago, by her." He swirled the beer, searching for a response that would minimize the truth. Maybe she thought plans had changed. Maybe we weren't coming. I set down my coffee, gaze fixed. "She replaced my name with someone else, Lai. That's not assumption. That's a receipt." Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. In that quiet, I understood everything that needed no words. Later, after he retreated to the den to zone out to ESPN, I sat at the dining room table with my laptop. I didn't look at old texts or photographs, hoping for reassurance in smiling faces that were never mine. Instead, I opened a new note, titled it, "Things She's Done That I Let Slide." The list came faster than I expected. Missing bridal shower emails, group Christmas itineraries with my name omitted, a mistagged Facebook post left for days, brunches scheduled the day after my absence. Each item, a thread in the web of my erasure, sharpened clarity into resolve. My jaw ached, not from anger, but from recognition. Then, another message arrived. Not from Valora, but her assistant, someone whose face I barely knew. A screenshot attached. "Valora, don't worry, she's not coming. I handled it. She handled it." 4 words. The room seemed to darken. Clock past 10. Lyle, still pretending ignorance, faded into the background. I stood, crossed the kitchen, retrieved my folder, and added these new pieces of proof. Closed it gently. This wasn't about a cabin. It never had been. It was about visibility, ownership, recognition. Sitting on the edge of the bed, folder in my lap, I traced the bold, black letters at the top of the yacht company email. Cancellation. Sharp, impersonal, but the truth wasn't in the email itself. It was in everything leading to it. The yacht wasn't just a boat. It was the first thing I ever bought entirely on my own. 5 years of late nights, skipped vacations, investors' rejections masked in polite smiles, last-minute delivery runs when drivers quit. Walking into meetings in heels with no cushion, second-hand blazers steamed in gas station bathrooms. "You don't need their validation," I whispered to myself. "Just build it. Make it real." And I had. When the company finally turned a profit, not a small one, the kind that made even the most skeptical investors return sheepishly, I didn't buy flashy items or designer labels. I bought the yacht quietly, a check signed with hands that didn't tremble, a strange calm settling over me. I had become the version of myself I had been striving toward for years. Yet legally, Lyle's name shared ownership for tax and trust reasons. Down the road, the accountant had said. Cleaner, easier. Down the road indeed. Months later, the yacht had become family lore, but not mine, not my part of the family. It was Lyle's yacht, the Preston family's sea legacy. Memories returned sharp. At a brunch I had attended, Valora raised her glass. "It's meaningful to have traditions tied to something we own as a family. Makes our legacy tangible." Then a fleeting glance at me. How wonderful that Marjorie supports it. Not as the creator, the architect, but as a supporter, a facilitator. My ideas, my labor, my vision, seeded by me, harvested by her. Recipes I had suggested, charity events I organized, design tips casually offered, later claimed by her as original. Each time, I told myself to pick my battles. But battles accumulate, silence compounds, and the cost of staying quiet had become unbearable. A few days ago, a memory returned from a lifestyle podcast clip. Valora, seated on a white lounger, hair curled to perfection, sunglasses resting on her head. "The yacht is more than a place," she said to the host. "It's where my family connects. It represents our continuity, our name, our story." The words struck me. Not only had she excluded me from the trip, she had attempted to write me out of the narrative entirely. I had let it happen by failing to correct assumptions, by letting Lyle speak for us, by nodding while she distributed credit and authority like props in a high school play. I rose, opened the bottom drawer of my dresser, and pulled out everything. Ownership papers, bank wires, the original yacht catalog with my notes, printed emails, evidence laid out across the bed, like material for a trial I hadn't planned, but now could not avoid. No outburst, no tears, just a low, simmering resolve that pulsed from near my collarbone downward, like steel threading itself through me. I whispered to the inked signature. "You tried to disappear me." Running a finger across it, the proof that I had built this from scratch, that my presence was undeniable. Now watch. The anticipation thrummed in me. They didn't know this version of me was arriving, the one ready to claim a seat at the table, to assert, not ask, to be seen, not obscured. The yacht, the documents, the folder, they were more than paper. They were evidence of existence, agency, authority. I had been silent for years, but silence could no longer erase me. The moment was coming, and I was prepared to occupy it fully, deliberately, without apology. This was my space, my legacy, my truth, and it would no longer be whispered around, ignored, or stolen. I chose a simple, structured navy dress, the kind that spoke without announcing itself. Neutral pumps, practical, polished, but not flashy. Jewelry minimal. My wedding band, and nothing more. My hair pulled back cleanly, a nod to the person I intended to be that day. Deliberate, composed, undeniable. No excitement, no apology, no pleading for acknowledgement. This was about presence, and presence didn't need embellishment. I laid the folder of documents atop the neatly folded dress on the bed. Ownership papers, bank wires, the original yacht catalog with my meticulous notes, emails tracing Valora's patterns, and the printed transcript of her live-streamed toast. The stack was heavy in my hands. Not physically, but in the weight of everything it represented. Years of invisibility, misattribution, exclusion, all captured in sharp ink and ordered evidence. Every sheet was a quiet assertion. I had been here all along. I had contributed. I had created. The sunlight coming through the window softened against the bedspread, but even that warmth couldn't dilute the tension coiled in my shoulders. I sipped a cold cup of coffee, watching the steam settle into the morning air. Each breath counted, grounding me in the purpose that had carried me through the months of compiling these fragments. Every email forwarded, every note highlighted, every line underlined, it had led to this moment. I thought of Valora, of her polished speeches, her effortless ability to commandeer attention and rewrite the narrative. And I thought of myself, of the countless times I had stood in the background, nodded politely, allowed roles and titles to be assigned like theater parts. That version of me, small, overlooked, quiet, would have left without a fight. But this version, the one standing now in the calm light of my bedroom, was made of steel-threaded resolve and careful planning. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need theatrics. The papers in my folder spoke louder than any speech. The car was booked for the drive to Newport, and as I zipped the suitcase shut, the soft click sounded like a punctuation mark at the end of years of patient observation. The navy dress lay neatly on top, the folder beneath, like a crown of facts, ready to be presented where they could no longer be ignored. I placed the folder carefully atop the folded dress, slid it into the suitcase, and ran my fingers over the smooth edges of the documents one last time. Each sheet was a tether to the truth I had built, a bridge between the invisibility I had endured and the acknowledgement I intended to claim. I paused by the window, the late afternoon light filtering through blinds, casting striped shadows on the floor. I could feel the tension in the room tighten and release with each breath. Outside, the world continued unaware. The faint hum of traffic, the distant laughter of neighbors, all ordinary and uninterrupted. But inside, I had aligned every fact, every memory, every ounce of composure into a single purpose. Newport would be different. I would not be the footnote. I would not be a guest. I would be the rightful owner, present in every space, every conversation, every camera frame. The folder in the suitcase felt almost alive, weighted with intention. I ran my thumb over the top edge of the papers, imagining the moment I would set them on the table, each page a beacon of accountability. The transcripts, the emails, the contracts, all of it threaded together into a story they couldn't rewrite or ignore. I could feel the shift already, the air changing around me, though I hadn't left the house yet. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the bedroom mirror, not tentative, not seeking permission. Just there, upright, shoulders relaxed but solid, eyes steady. This reflection was new to me, a version forged by clarity, preparation, and years of quiet accumulation of proof. Every late night, every skipped vacation, every uncomfortable meeting with investors who didn't see me, all of it had led to this moment. And now, it would count. The scent of the navy dress, the folder, the faintly brewed coffee, it all mingled in the space like an invisible incantation of readiness. I bent to pick up my purse, slipping in pens, a small notebook, and a phone fully charged. Each item chosen for utility, not adornment. Practicality was power. Precision was authority. I would need both, and I intended to use them with care. My suitcase clicked as I wheeled it across the hardwood floors, each step deliberate. No hesitation. The air was still, almost expectant. I imagined the dock, the marina, the sunlight glinting on the polished rails of the yacht. I imagined the staff recognizing me, the subtle falter in Valora's carefully maintained composure. I imagined the eyes of the family, the acknowledgement that had been denied for so long, flickering across the table. Each visualization was a rehearsal of consequence, not vengeance. Calm, certain, controlled, I paused at the doorway, hand on the frame, inhaling the domestic tranquility one last time before stepping into a space that had felt foreign for so long. The folder in my suitcase seemed to pulse with the weight of inevitability. Years of erased contributions and unspoken ownership were ready to surface in tangible, undeniable form. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to announce myself. The evidence would speak, and my presence would amplify its truth. Even the familiar hum of our household, the soft creak of floorboards under my boots, felt charged with potential. I allowed a small smile, not from satisfaction, but recognition. I had planned, prepared, and positioned myself at the threshold of acknowledgement. Every gesture, every choice of attire, every meticulous arrangement of papers was a silent assertion, and for the first time in years, I felt entirely ready to be counted, fully and visibly, in a narrative I had always had the right to inhabit. I lingered a moment longer in the bedroom, glancing over the papers that would define the coming hours. The yacht wasn't just a vessel. It was my creation, my perseverance, my proof. They might have tried to rewrite the story, to claim authority, to marginalize my presence. But now, with each carefully packed document, each precise plan, each controlled breath, I had reclaimed the narrative. I was stepping into Newport not as a shadow, not as a guest, but as the owner, and everyone waiting there, family, staff, and spectators alike, would finally have to reckon with it. With that, I closed the suitcase, the soft snap of the zippers echoing like a small bell of intent. I set it by the door, took a final sip of the now cold coffee, and let my hand rest lightly on the handle. A moment of stillness, before movement, before assertion. I could feel the tension in my chest slowly resolve into determination. The path ahead was clear, the stakes defined, and the opportunity for visibility tangible. This was no longer preparation. This was action. This was reclamation. I cast a final glance around the room, breathing in the familiar scents and textures, anchoring myself to a space that had once felt like a refuge, but now felt like a launch pad. Each document, each note, each piece of evidence was a tether to the truth, to what I had earned and what had been denied. I knew that when I arrived at Newport, the currents of recognition, surprise, and perhaps guilt would meet me fully. I didn't fear it. I welcomed it, because I had done the work. I had traced every omission, every slight, every deliberate exclusion, and now I would allow the world, the family, and most importantly myself, to see the full measure of what I had built, quietly, without applause, and entirely on my own terms. The car would arrive any moment. My suitcase, folder inside, lay ready. The navy dress awaited folded, crisp, commanding. My reflection in the mirror showed no hesitancy, only readiness. Only the quiet, absolute certainty of someone who had endured, observed, and finally prepared to claim space that had always been theirs. This was the calm before the assertion, the pause before visibility. And as I took the first step out of the room, the first step toward Newport, the weight of years lifted slightly, replaced by the steady pulse of agency and rightful presence, and the unmistakable sense that the narrative was about to shift forever. The air smelled faintly of salt and polished wood, a mixture that made every inhale feel sharp, electric. My suitcase rolled over the dock, each click of its wheels syncing with the heartbeat I barely noticed beneath the calm I had cultivated. The thin morning fog softened the steel rails and the ivory lifelines of the marina, turning every reflective surface into a ghostly mirror of the day to come. I adjusted the light tan coat across my shoulders, feeling its subtle sway in the gentle breeze. No jewelry, no flashy shoes, only the navy dress beneath it, a uniform of purpose rather than display. Each step toward the boarding ramp was deliberate, measured, carrying years of silenced frustration, of overlooked contributions, of invisible labor that had created this very yacht. My hand brushed over the folder tucked inside my suitcase, feeling the crisp edges of bank wires, contracts, and transcripts that had been my quiet armor. And then I saw her. Valora stood at the far end, her posture immaculate, her smile fixed in mid-conversation with a guest I vaguely recognized from some wedding we had attended months ago. Her hair was pinned perfectly, sunglasses perched at a precise angle. For a breathless moment, she froze entirely. The smile stalled, the hand mid-air, the champagne flute halfway to her lips. Eyes narrowed, and the world seemed to halt. It wasn't shock. It was subtle, controlled panic, the first crack in her carefully curated poise. Lyle lingered nearby, detached, an observer rather than participant, not by my side, not welcoming, simply present. The group around Valora pivoted slightly, an unspoken social choreography, enough to form a fragile perimeter, as if distance could rewrite reality. But I didn't slow. I didn't adjust. I didn't offer a smile or explanation. Just one sharp, crisp nod, acknowledgement of my own place, and then I walked past them, the quiet authority of someone who had already claimed the right to be here. The staff didn't falter. A tall woman in a navy blazer stepped aside, bowing ever so slightly, a gesture loaded with respect yet barely perceptible. I rolled the suitcase up the ramp, heels tapping rhythmically on the teak deck, once, twice settling into a steady cadence that seemed to echo in the empty spaces around me. The deck was calm, the water below glimmering with patient indifference, a perfect reflection of the resolve I carried. It wasn't an audience I sought. It was acknowledgement, and it had already arrived. Then the voice came, clear, deliberate, cutting through the morning haze. "Welcome aboard, Miss Marjorie. The owner is now aboard." It wasn't a greeting. It was a declaration. The words hung in the air, resonating far beyond the mere letters spoken. I didn't have to look to know the exact expression on Valora's face. Disbelief laced with rage. The carefully maintained composure she had rehearsed countless times for photos, videos, and family eyes now cracked, a tremor exposing the strain of her charade. I'd seen it before in small, fleeting moments, but now it played out in full. The audience, both real and imagined, could see it unravel. I paused at the railing, gripping it lightly, not to hold on, but to let the weight of the sea beneath, the morning around me, and the undeniable truth of my ownership settle through me. The yacht, my yacht, had been quietly mine for years, built from late nights, stubborn insistence, and the sweat of uncompensated effort that no family member had ever acknowledged. Every contract, every wire transfer, every note annotated in the yacht catalog had led to this moment, visible, undeniable, inarguable, a slow exhale, almost imperceptible, but carrying the satisfaction of preparation meeting opportunity. The crew resumed their tasks, the ambient sounds of rigging and water lapping the hull, underscoring the silence of recognition around me. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The gesture of acknowledgement, the nod, the staff's recognition, the careful pause of the world around Valora, was louder than any words I could have spoken. It was a confirmation that the narrative had shifted, that the story was finally mine to inhabit fully. Valora's hands twitched, almost imperceptibly, as if to adjust the champagne flute midair, to restore control she had never truly had. Her mouth opened and closed, rehearsed phrases failing her. The twin faces around her tried to mask unease. Her husband shifted, a slight tension in his jaw, a beat too long in a laugh that wasn't quite real. It was subtle, yes, but it was a first ripple, the initial disturbance in the surface of the carefully curated sea she had maintained for appearances. I could feel the eyes on me without seeing them, the collective gaze stretching across the dock, the crew, the lingering family, the air itself. Recognition had a weight, and it pressed evenly across the shoulders, spine straightening in response. Every carefully documented proof, every silent preparation, every moment I had spent compiling, analyzing, and readying myself for this confrontation coalesced in this single, sharp clarity. They could not deny what was already laid out. They couldn't erase the hours, the sweat, the money, the intention. It was mine. And now, it was visible. I stepped into the main deck lounge, passing the floral arrangements that screamed Valora's curated attention to detail, the tables set in meticulous hierarchy, and I didn't hesitate. Not a glance, not a pause, not a concession. I moved with the calm certainty of someone who had already won the right to occupy the space. The air around me shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, but enough to register on anyone paying attention. She had arrived, and she belonged. The hum of engines starting, the soft rustle of canvas against railings, the faint scent of polished teak and salt water, they all blended into a backdrop for the moment of assertion. I set down my suitcase with a precise, deliberate click, the sound punctuating the tension and marking the unspoken announcement. The owner was aboard. It wasn't defiance, it wasn't theatrics, it was inevitability made tangible, and somewhere behind the edges of controlled facades, in the restrained expressions and careful postures, I sensed the tremor of recognition. Valora had been prepared for appearances, for smiles, for scripted gratitude, but not for the quiet, undeniable presence of someone who had always belonged, but had been hidden from view. She hadn't anticipated the weight of truth arriving, not with confrontation, but with calm, methodical certainty. That was my advantage. That was the statement, louder than any words, reverberating in the clarity of the morning light on the dock, across the polished teak, over the water, and into every careful calculation she had made. I lingered by the railing a moment longer, not needing to witness the effect, only knowing it existed, felt it pulse through the air. The water below reflected back a calm certainty, indifferent yet patient, echoing the resolve that had carried me to this point. I had packed more than documents. I had packed every moment of self-denial, every time I had stayed quiet, every contribution stolen or minimized. And now it was visible, undeniable, and finally acknowledged. This wasn't arrival as a guest. This wasn't a performance. This was reclamation, subtle and precise, a quiet revolution without a single shout. And as the engines hummed, the first tendrils of sunlight touched the deck, and the crew adjusted to my presence without hesitation, I understood fully. The narrative had begun to bend toward truth, and there was nothing left for them to deny. The dining salon held its usual curated glow, flickering candlelight, gold-rimmed glasses catching the soft overhead illumination, and carefully folded linen napkins placed like miniature banners of authority. Valora swept the table with her practiced gaze, each guest a performer in her carefully constructed scene. I didn't flinch. I didn't offer a smile or an acknowledgement of her showmanship. I waited. Her closing toast rolled out like clockwork. Polished, rehearsed, perfectly timed. "I just want to thank everyone for being here," she began, voice melodic, eyes sweeping over the faces who knew their parts. "It's not just about luxury. It's about legacy. The people who keep our family story alive, who uphold its integrity, who understand the value of what we've built together. That's what makes this tradition so meaningful." Her words, dripping with the kind of warmth that is earned through rehearsal, landed around me, yet somehow never touched me. The subtext was clear. She was speaking of inclusion, of tradition, of value, and she was not speaking to me. I felt the calm pulse in my chest steady as the murmurs settled, wine glasses lowering as attention wavered. My leather folder rested on my lap, weight both comforting and deliberate. I slid it forward, letting it fall onto the polished surface with an authority no speech could rival. The room caught its shift. Gold glinted off its edges, the flicker of candlelight dancing across its smooth surface. I could feel eyes flicker toward it, then to me. Several guests leaned forward, curiosity overtaking politeness. Lyle remained still, an island of neutrality, eyes wide but unreadable, as if the entire scene existed outside his control. "I'd like to contribute something to this conversation about legacy," I said, voice calm, even, deliberate. The air compressed. Valora froze, glass suspended midair, a droplet of champagne glinting at the lip. The pause stretched, measured and unbearable, the collective intake of breath filling the room in silent tension. I opened the folder, removing the printed transcript from the live stream dinner, company letterhead crisp beneath my fingertips. Each page glimmered slightly in the warm light, a record, proof, tangible affirmation of my presence and voice. I laid it flat in the center of the table, edges aligned, neat, intentional. Silence claimed the space immediately, thick and magnetic, pulling attention toward the proof that had quietly, methodically been assembled over months. Guests bent closer. Eyes scanned the highlighted lines. Fingers traced the sentences that had been spoken, rehearsed for performance but exposed for truth. Lyle's gaze met mine, still steady, still quiet, an acknowledgement that no words could carry. Around the table the air was taut. Valora's hands twitched ever so slightly, the first imperfection in a veneer that had been polished for years. The flicker of disbelief in her eyes, a flash of raw frustration, and the meticulous control she cultivated so carefully began to falter. The crew hovered discreetly nearby, a silent acknowledgement of procedural correctness, professional affirmation that the rightful owner had claimed her space. Their posture, subtly deferential, contrasted with Valora's theatrical panache, and it was exquisite. I took a breath, steadying myself as the room recalibrated. No one interrupted, no one attempted correction. The power of presence, amplified by documentation, had shifted the narrative entirely. Valora's lips moved, a whisper of words I didn't hear, perhaps a feint of explanation, or a rehearsal to salvage composure. I didn't respond. My hands remained still, eyes calm. The murmurs of intrigue grew louder around her, yet I stayed seated, serene, the embodiment of quiet authority. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to perform. My presence, my evidence, my calm defiance had already dismantled the carefully constructed hierarchy. After a long pause, Valora's shoulders tightened imperceptibly. She adjusted a chair, realigned a centerpiece, gestures that were more instinct than reason, as if the physical rearrangement could restore dominance. Her husband, Tom, attempted to speak, a small laugh, a casual question, but it stumbled in the tense air. Nothing stuck. The space had shifted. The narrative had altered. All that remained was acknowledgement. Mine. I observed the subtle tremor in her movements, the fraction of a second delays, the hesitation that belied her confidence. Her eyes found mine once, flitting away immediately, scanning the room for allies, for reassurance, for an unseen lifeline. None existed. I had prepared for this moment, meticulously, not out of spite, but from recognition. This was never about a cabin, or a dinner, or the optics. This was about visibility. This was about authority, earned and undeniable. Callista, beside me, watched the scene unfold, fingers idly scrolling, yet her eyes alight with the understanding of narrative impact. "That's going viral in 3, 2, she whispered, a smirk betraying the satisfaction of the impending audience. Social media, cameras, comments, they would all witness the shift in power. The subtle but complete reclamation of space that had always been mine. Valora's hand twitched again, poised over her phone, attempting to suppress or control the exposure. Her smile returned briefly, brittle, fragile, an attempt to mask the reality she could not undo. I remained still, absorbing the room's reaction, letting the weight of meticulous preparation settle like a tide against the hull of the yacht. Then, as the closing toasts dwindled, I rose deliberately. The folder remained in my hand, pages aligned, edges crisp. I set it gently in the center of the table, allowing the evidence to speak. "I'd like to contribute something to this conversation about legacy," I repeated, steady, confident, voice carrying without strain. The room paused again. Valora's glass froze in midair, lips parted slightly, a fragile mask cracking. Every subtle gesture, every carefully measured posture, reflected the internal collapse that had been silently building. I felt the silence wrap around me, heavy and protective. Guests leaned closer, intrigued and alert. Some whispered to one another, some tilted their heads in curiosity. Lyle's gaze met mine for a fleeting moment, a shared recognition of authority, of accomplishment, of truth acknowledged where silence had once been enforced. It was a quiet apex, an emotional peak that wasn't shouted but profoundly felt, a validation that transcended the curated performances of those who had attempted to erase me. The moment didn't end with drama or spectacle. It ended with acknowledgement. Valora stepped back, lips twitching into a forced smile, finally retreating from the center of attention. I returned to my seat, posture unflinching, letting the truth of the folder, the weight of my ownership, settle into the room like a quiet declaration that needed no applause. I wasn't angry. I wasn't gloating. I was ready. Ready to be seen. Ready to be acknowledged, and ready to claim space I had built with patience, strategy, and unwavering clarity. Around us, the ambient light caught the edges of documents, the glint of gold-rimmed plates, the subtle shimmer of eucalyptus runners. The room had shifted imperceptibly, but decisively. I sipped my lemon water slowly, savoring the quiet power, knowing that the narrative had already changed, and that the week ahead would unfold on my terms, not on the curated stage of someone else's design. I walked the outer deck barefoot, the teak cool under my feet, the salt air stinging just enough to wake every nerve. My shoes swung gently from my hand, a small gesture of disregard for performance, of comfort in my own authority. Below, the yacht hummed softly, engines steady, the marina shrinking slowly behind us. Small clusters of family members had drifted apart like broken sandcastles, some fading into cabins without a word, leaving the carefully choreographed hierarchy in fragments. From the corner of a partially open lower deck cabin, I heard Valora's voice. Low, not theatrical, not demanding attention, just a murmur that carried more weight than any apology could. She took it. It was always meant to be mine. The words, thin as a sliver of sunlight, cut through the calm. I didn't stop. I didn't pause. I didn't knock. I didn't need acknowledgement from her anymore. I had what she could never take: visibility, recognition, and the quiet satisfaction of evidence in hand. Back in our cabin, Lyle was folding a shirt by the small built-in dresser, his posture calm, but his eyes betraying a heaviness I hadn't seen before. I perched on the edge of the bed, hands resting lightly on my knees, watching him gather himself. Finally, he spoke, voice thick. I think I always knew. Not the extent of it, but I saw things. Every time she made a dig, every time she left you out, I thought if I kept the peace long enough, it would work itself out. I didn't respond immediately. I didn't need to. I let his acknowledgement hang in the air between us, heavy with unspoken apologies and realizations. Sometimes, the sharpest sentences are the ones left unsaid. I nodded, silent, sliding under the sheets. I didn't invite further discussion. I didn't push for his voice to absolve me. It wasn't forgiveness I sought. It was recognition, and that alone was enough. The quiet weight of the night pressed in around me, comforting and final. Morning came with gentle light spilling across the lounge. I carried my cup of black coffee, its warmth a steady anchor, and settled into my favorite chair with my notebook. One by one, family members drifted down. Some paused, their eyes meeting mine briefly, offering nods that weren't apologies, but weren't dismissals either. The recognition came quietly, in gestures rather than words. Maddie, ever polite and careful, lingered near the breakfast bar, voice soft. I should have spoken up a long time ago, she admitted, eyes not quite meeting mine. Lyle's aunt, who had once criticized me for seriousness, placed an extra spoon beside my cup. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Just the act, careful and deliberate, carried weight. Ron, Tom's older brother, muttered as he passed. I saw it coming. Didn't think it had crack like this. These fragments, small and seemingly insignificant, combined into something more substantial than the rehearsed smiles and hollow compliments I had endured for years. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting each quiet acknowledgement settle into my chest. The hushed weight of understanding resonated deeper than any applause or loud confrontation. The family had witnessed the evidence, felt the truth settle across the table, and now, even in the absence of dramatic gestures, recognized it. My presence, my ownership, my voice had shifted the room. It wasn't spectacular. It wasn't performative. It was undeniable. That night, alone in the cabin, I stared at the ceiling. My mind traced the contours of the self I had once tried to compress into polite corners, palatable, agreeable, unnoticed. That version of me had bent and nodded, swallowed her own worth, and tried tirelessly to smooth over the cracks for the comfort of others. I mourned her, not for weakness, but for exhaustion, for all the energy spent bending to a narrative that never acknowledged my presence. And yet, I also recognized the strength she had given me. Every compromise, every nod, every silent acquiescence had built the foundation for the presence I now commanded. I had carried the knowledge, the evidence, the patience to step into my own space with authority. The tide that once seemed to pull me away had merely clarified my path. The acknowledgement of others was quiet, yes, but it was authentic, cumulative, and lasting. I exhaled, the sound merging with the soft, rhythmic pulse of the sea against the hull. There were no clinking glasses, no fanfare, no forced smiles. Just recognition. The folder of contracts, transcripts, and bank receipts sat beside me, tangible proof of years of work, of patience, of silent assertion. I ran my fingers over the edges of each document, the smooth weight of paper a reminder that preparation and truth outlast performance and pretension. The night deepened. The cabin darkened, and in that darkness, I felt an uncommon peace. It wasn't about Valora's acknowledgement. It wasn't about forcing the family to see what was always evident. It was about me, claiming the space I had earned, asserting the authority I had built, and finally, being fully present in my own story. The soft whisper of the sea echoed around me, steady, impartial, and patient. A reminder that the truths we carry quietly can ripple further than any loud confrontation. I let the quiet victory settle in my chest. I had been erased, minimized, and overlooked for years. I had endured performances, misattributions, and subtle exclusions. But tonight, in the slow acknowledgement of gestures, in the absence of spectacle, I was seen. Not by the loudest voices, not by the curated performances, but by the weight of facts, the presence of patience, and the subtle nods of those who had finally noticed. And that recognition, small as it might appear, was enduring, profound, and entirely mine. The cabin settled into silence around me. I sipped the last of my coffee and closed my notebook, the pen resting atop pages that chronicled a journey from invisibility to recognition. The world outside hummed softly. The sea, the engines, the distant lights of the marina. But inside, I was centered, composed, and wholly present. The tide of acknowledgement had arrived quietly, steadily, and I finally understood that it never needed to roar to be heard. I had claimed my space, and in doing so, had restored the version of myself I had once thought lost. Bending no longer, yielding no more, wholly unafraid, and quietly victorious. Lyle simply offered a small smile, the kind that carried weight without needing embellishment. It wasn't dramatic, not cinematic, not the kind of gesture that announces reconciliation to the world. It was private, quiet, almost imperceptible, yet it felt like a lifetime of tension being released in a single breath. I sat on the edge of the bed, cradling my own mug of tea, savoring the stillness that had finally settled around us. Outside, the gentle rocking of the yacht mirrored the rhythm of my own calm, a soft pulse that contrasted sharply with the months of anxiety, exclusion, and silent fury that had preceded it. I let the warmth seep into my fingers, each sip grounding me in the realization that ownership, real ownership, wasn't measured in approvals or forced acknowledgement. It was this: the knowledge of what you'd built, the endurance you'd maintained, and the courage to finally claim your space without apology. I turned to the window, watching the golden streaks of sunset spill across the Pacific, painting the hull and deck in amber hues. The air smelled faintly of salt and wood polish, carrying with it the quiet affirmation of a journey completed, not merely in miles traveled, but in reclamation of self. For years, I had bent, folded, and minimized myself to fit the narrative others wrote for me. I had smiled when my contributions were misattributed, nodded when decisions about my life were made in rooms I wasn't allowed to enter, and swallowed my frustration because it felt easier to maintain a fragile harmony than to confront the truth. Yet, here I was, feet bare against the deck, arms loose at my sides, the weight of the folder with contracts, transcripts, and receipts safely tucked away behind me. The documents were physical, concrete proof, but the real victory was intangible, a restoration of voice, presence, and dignity that no manipulation could erase. Later, I wandered to the bow, letting the wind lift strands of hair across my face. The horizon stretched endlessly, a mix of soft pinks and muted blues blending into the sea, and I realized I had finally stopped looking outward for validation. The tide didn't need my acknowledgement. The sea didn't care about my history, and the yacht, my yacht, responded to me only because I had built it, nurtured it, and claimed it. Each wave that brushed against the hull seemed to echo the affirmation I'd long sought, that my existence, my decisions, my authority mattered. And in that clarity, the exhaustion of years spent contorting myself to fit a false narrative melted into a serene, unshakable strength. By late afternoon, the lounge had emptied except for Callista, still working on the coverage of the moment that had gone viral. She glanced up at me, eyebrows raised in quiet admiration. "People are really responding," she said, her voice low and serious. The comments were piling up, strangers and friends alike recognizing a woman who had stood her ground, who had quietly refused to be erased. "It's not just attention, it's acknowledgement of truth," I said. Callista nodded, tapping a few more keys before setting the laptop aside. "Record keeping," she said again. "Yes, record keeping. Documentation of endurance, assertion, and the act of claiming what was always yours." As twilight settled, Lyle joined me on the stern once more, hands in his pockets, gaze shifting from the horizon to the gentle curve of the deck beneath our feet. He didn't speak immediately. The silence between us was not empty, but loaded with reflection, recognition, and an unspoken agreement. Finally, he said, voice steady, but tinged with the faintest emotion, "I should have protected you, spoken up, intervened. I didn't, not when it counted." His confession wasn't performative. It wasn't meant for anyone else. It was simple, honest, and carried the weight of years of passive observation. I nodded, letting it settle. There was no need for dramatic absolution, no need for a grand gesture. The acknowledgement was enough. The ownership of my narrative, my contributions, my very place in this space had been claimed, not through confrontation alone, but through meticulous preparation, unwavering presence, and the courage to be seen fully without retreat or apology. Lyle exhaled, letting the tension slip away, and I realized that this, more than any legal document or viral moment, was what restored equilibrium to the world around me. It was personal, silent, profound. Night fell with a gentle hush. The sky a deep indigo scattered with stars. I returned to the reading nook beside the starboard windows, allowing the calm to envelop me. I thought about the Marjorie who had bent herself into shadows, who had swallowed words, who had let opportunities for recognition drift past in the hope of maintaining peace. That Marjorie had served her purpose, to show that endurance, patience, and internal strength could withstand years of subtle erasure. But now, the new Marjorie occupied the space fully, without hesitation, without concession, without apology. The lessons learned, the endurance displayed, and the quiet triumphs accumulated into a sense of self so solid that the absence of external validation no longer mattered. From the cabin, I could see Valora seated inside behind the wide window pane, still as marble. Her usual flurry of movements, her tight smiles, the orchestration of presence, all reduced to stillness. She caught my gaze briefly. I didn't flinch. I didn't grant her a reaction. Power, I understood, sometimes resided not in confrontation, but in simple refusal to invest energy in those who sought to diminish you. The acknowledgement had shifted without fanfare, without spectacle, and that quiet dominance was perhaps the most telling of all. Dinner approached, and fully the matriarch approached me with a softness in her posture, less rigid than usual, almost hesitant. "I didn't see it before," she admitted. "Now I do." No apology followed, no explanation, merely recognition. It was sufficient. Some truths require no embellishment. Some acknowledgments need no words. The quiet had spoken volumes. As the yacht's lights reflected off the water in fractured patterns, I finally allowed myself a moment to breathe fully. I realized that the acceptance, the visibility, the restored authority, it wasn't something that had been granted to me by anyone else. It had been built, earned, and claimed through years of steadfast determination, through silent preparation, and through the courage to finally stand and be fully present. Alone on the deck, I felt the rhythm of the sea sync with my own, a gentle affirmation that my place, my voice, and my existence were undeniable. I wasn't just occupying space, I was defining it. The sun dipped low, streaks of amber spilling across the polished wood, and for the first time in years, the deck felt like a sanctuary, not a stage for others' narratives. In the quiet aftermath, with the waves lapping softly against the hull, I knew that true legacy isn't validated by others. It is claimed, maintained, and honored by oneself. And for the first time, I had done exactly that, fully, unreservedly, and with peace. The cabin smelled faintly of cedar and warm linen as Lyle handed me a small cup of tea, his hand brushing against mine in a gesture so simple it carried more weight than any apology ever could. He perched on the edge of the bed, silence stretching between us like a fragile bridge. "Thank you for staying," he said softly, the words carrying the gravity of someone who had weighed his own conscience against the ease of silence. "You could have walked?" I looked at him, really looked, and saw the strain of truth in his eyes, the effort of someone trying not just to be right, but to be real. I didn't say, "I forgive you." That would have been premature. Instead, my hand rested lightly on his, a quiet acknowledgement that we were present in this moment together, no declarations required. The ship began its slow arc back toward shore under the pale early morning sky. I stepped onto the top deck once more, the wood warm beneath my bare feet, the wind gentle, carrying a briny scent that seemed to whisper of freedom and release. The water stretched endlessly, soft silver etched with the pale gold of dawn, reflecting the stillness I felt inside. For the first time in ages, there was no need to perform, no need to justify, no need to prove. I caught my reflection in the glass doors as I turned to go inside. Not hesitant, not waiting for permission, just me. The house seemed to exhale alongside me, creaks in the floorboards, and the hum of the engines all blending into a quiet symphony of return. Once home, I set my suitcase down in the front hallway and let the silence settle. No alerts, no missed calls, no text messages from Valora. For the first time in years, I didn't check. Slowly, deliberately, I unpacked not just clothes, but the weight I had carried back from the yacht, documents, evidence, small trophies of authority reclaimed. Each item returned to its rightful place, each piece a tangible reminder that I no longer needed anyone's validation to assert my presence. By Wednesday, while organizing the hallway credenza, I discovered a small, folded note tucked between an old envelope and a forgotten grocery list. My father's handwriting, unmistakable, blocky, neat, deliberate. "Don't fight for a seat. Build your own table." I held it for a long while, absorbing its quiet wisdom, the gentle nudge of someone who had always seen the resilience I didn't yet know I possessed. Maybe it had been tucked into a birthday card years ago, or handed over in passing after a dinner where I felt invisible but had been noticed. The words weren't a consolation. They were a call to action, one I now understood fully. The next morning, my phone rang. The name surprised me. Maya, Valora's niece, 23, sharp-eyed, quietly observing from the corners of every family gathering. "I hope I'm not crossing a line," she said, hesitating. "But I've been thinking about the trip. About you." "You're the only one in the family who built something yourself. Not inherited, not married into. You made it. I'm applying for this business mentorship program, and I wondered if you could look over my application." I didn't speak immediately, letting her words hang in the air like lanterns. "Yes," I said finally, my voice steady. Legacy begins quietly, I realized. Through mentorship, through guidance, through the deliberate passing on of knowledge to someone ready to carry it forward. A week later, I hosted Sunday brunch. Nothing formal, no pretension, just eggs, toast, fresh strawberries, and people who had earned their place at my table. Lyle made the coffee with care, the rich aroma weaving through the room. Callista brought lemon bars, placing them gently on the table with a quiet smile. Ronald showed up with his wife, taking the seat bathed in morning sunlight. I didn't attempt to fill the house with names or bloodlines, only those who understood presence, respect, and engagement. As I watched Lyle pour coffee, I told him softly, "Just the ones who belong by spirit, not blood." He nodded, pressed a gentle kiss to my temple, and I felt a warmth that had little to do with coffee. Later, as I rearranged the bookshelves in the dining room, my mind wandered to what Valora might have said if she had ever truly apologized. I imagined excuses, the rehearsed narrative of protecting the family name, the careful deflection of responsibility. And I realized I didn't need her words. I had affirmation in the table I built, in the people who chose to be present, in the space I had claimed without waiting for permission. I could forgive silently, without ceremony, without expecting recognition. The table itself was a statement. It wasn't from Lai's parents' house, nor curated to display hierarchy or social favor. I had picked it out secondhand, refinished it myself, and filled it with people who could converse without pretense, laugh without performance, and simply be present. No toasts, no cameras, no validation required, just authentic conversation, with pauses, tangents, and laughter that didn't need an audience. I looked around the room, seeing them not because they were required to be there, but because they wanted to be, and I smiled. This seat had never been granted. I had built it. I understood then that sometimes the most radical act isn't to shout louder, but to stand still, claim your space, and stop apologizing for taking up room in a world that underestimated you. I had spent years believing that compliance, quiet endurance, and proving worth would earn me a place at someone else's table. Now, I knew differently. When you build your own table, you need no invitation. Silence, patience, and deliberate action are not weaknesses, they are strategies. True legacy is not measured by inheritance or family approval, but by what you create when no one is looking, when every choice to assert yourself is intentional, and when you finally acknowledge your own authority. Healing often doesn't announce itself with apologies or grand gestures. It is quiet, persistent, and transformative. I thought of those who have been silenced, marginalized, or overlooked, and I wondered who might hear these words now. Have you ever been an outsider in your own family, stayed quiet when you should have spoken up when no one expected it? Share your story in the comments. Drop a 1 if this resonates. Tell me where you're watching from. Which moments connect with you? Even if it didn't resonate, I want to hear that too. Your experience matters. If this story moved you, inspired reflection, or made you pause, subscribe. Future chapters will delve deeper into the nuances of claiming space, asserting voice, and building a legacy on your terms. Family may define the stage, but you define your presence, your voice, and the ownership of your own narrative. That quiet, deliberate assertion, the act of standing fully, finally as yourself, is more powerful than any apology, any acknowledgement, or any forced inclusion ever could be. The seat I built is mine, and in that, I have found my peace.